everyone. How are y'all doing tonight? Good. Hopefully cooler in here than you are outside. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. So, hopefully, we all woke up today feeling a little bit more hopeful about the future of this city, maybe even this country, and what better way to celebrate having hope for the future than with a debut author, and in fact, two debut novelists, Esther Ifesinachi Okonkwo and Reuben Reyes Jr. Tonight, these two will be discussing the family dynamics, blossoming relationships, immigrant experiences, and more within Esther's debut novel, The Tiny Things Are Heavier. Before we get officially started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. I'm going to read some quick bios, and then we're going to dive right in. So first, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion. So please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Esther will be around to sign and personalize your books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And finally, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Tiny Things Are Heavier online using the link in the live stream description. Okay, now for these two you see in front of you, Esther is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a fourth-year PhD student in creative writing at Florida State University. Her works have appeared in Isele Magazine, Southeast Review, and Catapult. Home for her is Lagos, Nigeria, and she lives in Tallahassee, Florida. And as I mentioned earlier, Reuben Reyes Jr. joins Esther in conversation tonight. Reuben is the son of two Salvadoran immigrants, also a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and the author of There's a Rio Grande in Heaven, which was a finalist for the Story Prize. His first novel, Archive of Unknown Universes, is forthcoming on July 1st. That's all from me. Please join me in giving Esther and Reuben a very warm welcome.
You gonna kick us off with the reading?
Yes. Oh, thank you all so much for coming. I'm just pleased. So I'm going to read a section from the beginning of the book, and this section I think embodies like what a professor of mine likes to call yearning, like Somi's yearning. And here she's sort of thinking about her brother Mizie, and I think a lot of her trying to come into herself is we see it through her relationship with her brother. So I'd like to read this section. She liked listening to him dream and him being Mizie. He spoke with such certitude and criticality that she too began to dream with him. She dreamt of his Ikeja mansion with a pool and a gym and a simpering gate man. She dreamt of his G-Wagon, black and glossy. Mostly, she dreamt of him bursting with accomplishment, his swagger shining, his heart at rest. She did not need to dream for herself. Her path was laid out for her. When she was about 10 years old, her mother declared that Somi would be an English teacher. Even then, Somi could sense that this decision had nothing to do with her abilities. Being a teacher was, to her mother, a thing to do alongside the primary identities of a woman: wife, mother. Somi sauntered into her mother's ideal future with a glacial smoothness. After graduating with a BA in English literature, she taught English for a year at a public secondary school during her national youth service. There, she quickly realized that she hated teaching, the monotony of it, planning lesson notes, grading assignments, attending staff meetings. The part of the job Somi liked most was her daily banter with her favorite students, the overly ambitious ones, serious with schoolwork, ever ready with questions for her. She loved entertaining them, teasing them. She loved that they were still at the age where they were allowed amorphous ambitions. I want to be a scientist, an astronaut, a rich man, they exclaimed. And it sustained her, this part of the job, until she completed her service year and decided to do something else, to find what she liked. She applied to all the jobs she was qualified for, at a bank as a cashier, at a pharmacy as a receptionist, at an oil and gas company as a marketer. She wrote the tests, went for the interviews, but the rejections piled. And each time she told herself it was okay. It was okay because Maisie was abroad working and his dreams would materialize. And just being near his glory would be enough. Of course, there remained the pinching thought that she'd not learned to dream, to love something, that she'd subconsciously held on to the unspoken promise that if she played her part, stayed in school, graduated, avoided getting pregnant, she'd somehow get what she wants from life: safety, ease. And she'd done it all, even if with cold impassivity. Maisie's deportation and then his suicide attempt revealed her fragility. There was no glory to sharing. She stood now at the bottom of something deep, waiting to be pulled out. Thank you.
So beautiful. All right. Before we start, I'm gonna compliment you and use all the compliments that I saved and didn't give to you backstage. I just want to first say that I'm really proud of you
Oh, thank you.
for writing such
I'm
an
proud of you
incredible.
too.
Thank you. An incredible novel. Even hearing you read that section, I was just like reminded how much I came to care for these characters, which I think is maybe something we take for granted when we read fiction. But it's a huge accomplishment, and you just have written like everyone says, oh, I love family stories, but this is an excellent family story.
Thank
amongst other
you.
things. So I'm just so excited for you all to read it and for all the readers you're gonna find. So I want to start by talking about Iowa a little bit. It was gonna come up
Dangerous.
because we can discourse or not discourse as much as you want. But the novel starts basically in Iowa, right? With your protagonist arriving. And you write about Iowa so well. It's a false university, but right? But it's a made up university, but I think I know where the inspiration came from. And I'm just kind of curious, what do you think people get wrong about Iowa still? Let's start there. Either Iowa City as a city or a place, or even the institutions that you might have based some of this novel on.
I should ask Somi. But I think so. The thing is, I experienced Iowa in a very weird way, because I left Lagos and then just like landed in Iowa City, and there couldn't be two cities more different, you know. So it was a lot of my sort of trying to understand, you know, like being in a new place and understand America. I was, you know, understanding it while being in this sort of famous writing program, the Iowa Writers Workshop. And so I think that it was just two huge things sort of clashing at the same time. So I would say like my experience with it is also fused with, you know, my immigrant experience, which complicated a lot of things. I was very homesick. I was also trying to like things like cheese, because it's like really big in Iowa, and also being in this program that I mean, people talk a lot about how there's pressure in the program. The program itself doesn't put pressure on its students. I don't think so. It's like very laid back. We get to like go to workshop, like go to school once in a week. Like it's such a huge privilege.
Yeah.
But it also comes with a lot of ennui, I think, right? I met the most melancholic people I've ever met in my life there, and I was one of them, right? Like you just have a lot of time to just like you know, think about the world.
Yeah.
So
read
I was
read the saddest short stories ever written.
yeah, and then also like so we were it was a very very and I was also trying to learn a lot. Somebody at my reading yesterday said something about regression, like when you come to a new place, like you
Yeah.
regress, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, that's the perfect word. I felt like a child, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, like, you know, I things like the traffic signs, for instance, I had to like figure that out. You just little things. So I would say
Yeah.
just that sort of coming of age. And I came when I was like in my 20s, my like 23, when I was still like really figuring things out. And so it was very complicated for me.
Yeah.
And the best part, of course, was like I made a lot of very good friends.
Yeah.
You know, people who are still readers still today, and spectacular faculty to my mind.
Oh yeah.
But I think there's a denseness um, with that expectation that's just I don't know, and nobody knows where it comes from, but
Yeah.
it's there.
It's there.
It's there. There's this pressure,
Yeah.
and you kind of feel it. So I think it made
Yeah.
my just coming to like just sort of experience in the US very complicated, and you can see a lot of that in
Yeah.
in Sami trying to experiencing her own institution.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a really weird place. I grew up in California, and going was like, where am I? Like, what is
Yeah.
this place with
Cold too.
so cold, the coldest place I've ever lived?
Yeah, the year that I moved to Iowa was the year of the polar vortex.
Mm-hmm.
It was like I remember walking to campus one day and just being like, why?
Why?
I just kept, you know,
Yeah.
saying why?
Were you there during the derecho? Do you remember this? The windstorm shut down the electricity for a little bit.
Yeah, I was.
Like, what's going on here?
I was.
What is this place?
I was. It was yeah. Such a
Yeah.
strange place.
Well, maybe one quick follow up on that, because to be clear to everyone, like your protagonist Somi, how do I say Somi?
Yes.
She is not actually at the workshop, right? She's a graduate English PhD, I think. But there are some characters that are involved in the workshop, I'll say. Or this version of the workshop. I'm curious about that decision. It feels really intentional that you didn't write a truly an MFA novel or a workshop novel. Although in many ways it is a campus novel. I'm curious about that.
I feel like because that would bore me.
Right?
Yeah. Like because I've lived it, just being in. I have my MFA, PhD. I've been in so many workshops. I just didn't want to really do that. But also, I think it's Somi's character to not like in many ways, she starts off as a passive character,
right?
Which I don't think you can sort of have as a writer. Like, writers are very.
You gotta have at least a little bit of ego.
Yeah, you know what I mean. She doesn't. She needed to get some ego throughout the book. So she starts off very passive, and I wanted that sort of passivity to contrast with Brian, because that's also like a thing that I think works very well with, just having characters who have different temperaments, right? So she's passive, and I think it's at the core of her, because she sort of is passive in her relationship with Maisie, she's passive in her relationship with Brian, she's passive in her, in her desires, her yearnings, right? Her entire thing is to just always stand behind someone, which I don't think you can be as a writer. There's a little bit of a god complex, I think, with being a writer.
And sometimes a lot of a god complex.
A lot. See Brian involved.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love reminiscing. Okay, my next question is about trips and planes and airports. There's quite a few of them at really important moments in this novel. And there's late in the book a line that I didn't write the whole one down, but part of it. And you're talking about, I think, Somi's academic work, kind of how it's developing. And you write that she's interested in travel as survival of what it means to leave home, not for the mere adventure of it. And so it feels like I was noticing it as like kind of a theme throughout, and then it's like very explicitly there. I have some theories as to why it's fun or interesting to write fiction about trips. But I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit. Why that was such a big part of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, on a sort of structural craft level, like
Mhm.
it's really good to sort of have your characters in different places, meet different people, like, have different challenges. It just, gives the story like first and second and third lives at
Yeah.
different parts of the novel. But for some, it just makes sense, right? Because, immigration, like, you're
Yeah.
getting on planes, you're traveling. So I think that that's very interesting. And I like that you read that line because I remember having workshopped a few pages of the novel, and this was in the very early stages of the novel where. Because the way I'd conceived it at first was two POVs. So we had Summy's POV and we had Mizzie's POV.
Interesting.
And it was like just a fat novel. And I had to do something about it.
Yeah.
But I remember workshopping Mizzie's novel, and somebody was like, "Oh, Wanderlust, like he has Wanderlust," and I just was so taken aback by the comment because it's like not Wanderlust in any way for him, right? He's trying to survive. He's trying to sort of enter into this expectation, this version of himself that you know again he's taking on in whatever
Yeah.
shape and manner. So and for Somi also, right? Because she doesn't start out wanting to survive. She starts out wanting because she doesn't have that expect pressure. She doesn't take it on. But she has to start to think about her survival.
Yeah.
As time goes on, because again, it's a coming of age novel, right? A
Yeah.
lot of the things that she sort of begins to realize have always been there, but she comes of age, so she has the capacity to sort of then um, um, understand all of her situation better. She takes responsibility for her life, so she understands that she has to survive.
Yeah.
So I think that when Wanderlust, I was like, oh no, this characters here are trying
Right.
to survive, and a big part of this novel for me, honestly, was just thinking about like the political and economic condition of Nigeria.
Yeah.
I think that, and it's crazy because like I'm reading yesterday, we're talking about how it used to be a great place, like just 6, 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Like a lot of people were very excited to like go to school in the US and in the UK and go back home and start businesses and do like all of the things that people do at home. But that's not the case right now. There is this thing called Japa culture, right? Like migration has its own ideology now. It has its own name because there's just a lot of people leaving because it is, to put it very, very frankly, a place that kills dreams, right? And we see that with Mezier, we see that with Bayo, we see that with Amara Somi's friends,
Yeah.
and so a lot of this book for me was trying to do that thing that fiction does, where it's like, okay, we have all of these big themes about class and
Yeah.
everything, but just like, okay, this is how it affects people's lives.
Right.
This is how it affects how they dream. This is how it affects how they relate to people in just very tiny
And how do you
ways.
root it, right? Like it's very rooted in these characters.
Yes.
And I have a question about class and class system later on, so I'm going to come back to it. The last thing I'll say, I like that you started your answer talking about craft, because I think travel, something that does in this novel and that I think in a lot of fiction it can do, is that it gives, I mean, it's classic like fish out of water, right? Like you drop someone, especially if it's like a new place they've never been, it's like immediately creates inherent tension that you can then just play with. And that happens for a number of characters, right? For Somi in the US, in Iowa, for Brian, who's American, elsewhere. I don't want to say too much. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such a, it was like, I don't know, it was great. I thought, basically I was thinking about a lot of the fiction I've written that takes place on
how
trips.
my brain actually works.
Yeah.
Like it works, and I think it just the trips really helped. I have to compartmentalize like
Mm.
sections of
Yeah.
anything I'm working on. It's like and then the trips actually helped. So it was like we have the part one when she
Yeah.
comes to the US, we have the part two when she goes back to Nigeria, and then
Yeah.
not to spoil,
And
but
it gives
like
some movement, right?
yes,
Like because the
yes,
characters are physically moving,
yes,
the narrative also.
yes.
Yeah, it's really smart and works really well here. Yeah, and it throughout the book, it's like one of the, I guess, structural bases of it in some ways. Yeah, let's talk craft. I want to talk craft.
Let's do craft.
Why not?
That's my favorite thing to do.
I want to ask about POV actually. I'm glad you talked a little bit about it.
Yeah.
So you were writing a really close third, it feels like. It's really close to Somi. Basically all from her POV with slight ways of getting around it. Some one essay, one letter maybe,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering correctly. Well, I guess you've already answered this question. I was gonna ask, was that always the POV?
No, it was not. Like I had written from Mizzy's perspective.
And was that in third or was that in?
It was also very close third.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most difficult parts of figuring out this book. And I think in most books, right, like it's voice and POV. Like once you get that, you have, I think, a book, right? And just it was different versions of this to sort of then decide on third person, present tense. I think the present tense was also a thing that because I'd done past tense, I'd done like first person. So yeah, it was and I immediately clicked. I just felt
what felt
so
right
good
about it. That's what I'm curious.
I think again because Somi is such a passive character in the first first few pages of the book. It only felt right for it to be a present tense, I think, to sort of get have this sort of urgency to the narrative. I really wanted that. And then close third, she's also very introspective. Like if you have a passive character, then if they're not doing much, then the juice has to be somewhere, right? And I think the juice here is in her interiority. So the close third helped me get very into her head. And she's also a person who I find the way her brain works to be very interesting.
Yeah.
So, a lot of interiority, and it just felt like the perfect POV to accomplish that.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that some of my favorite passages in the whole book are these moments where she recedes into herself and starts reflecting on what's going on. And I think you're right that I think you could do that in the first person in some way, but I feel like the close third was a really good way of doing it. And you're right, it's interesting that in those moments, obviously they're triggered by things that happen in the plot and things that are going on in her life. But there's these beautiful standalone moments where it's just her, which is equally impressive in a novel that is so much about people's relationships to each other. But yeah, it's a very nice balance that you have there. Let's see. Okay. Now I want to talk about class.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna give my little hot take first.
Okay,
my hot take is that people are always talking about why are there no novels about money, right? You hear this, and there totally are, right? But what I think people are latching onto is that some of them I think fail to go, and it's not just novels, it's like media. I think about White Lotus, which love, I'm all in, but I don't think it's that interesting on class because like to me it comes down to like rich people act badly to the poor people, and it's like yes, correct. But like class is so much more complicated than that, and there's like these gray areas, and there's like what about when we're not talking about the 1%? What about when we're talking about the middle class and differences there? And I was so thrilled to read a novel that takes class seriously and tackles it in an interesting way. It's definitely a theme. It's a theme, but it's like also the beating heart, and it's tied to everything: the characters, the relationships with each other, the plot. And I'll also say that I thought it was really, I don't know. I just feel like because like many readers, I think American readers especially, I knew so little about Nigeria and the class system there that loved seeing different characters' relationship to it.
Mhm.
And then also to see this character who then has to grapple with an American class system on top of it.
Mhm.
It's like a
Mhm.
lot going on. And I'm just like wondering how you managed to do that because
Yeah.
it's just such a web. Um, so I guess more specifically, was it like partially the way you were thinking about class? Was it, friendships or relationships that you have that you were thinking about? Were you doing
Yeah.
a lot of research? I'm
Yeah.
just kind of curious how
Yeah.
you dealt with it because
Yeah.
it's so sprawling and
Yeah,
complicated.
I think so. I think it's because just like Nigeria's class system is very complicated. Like I say I grew up poor, but then I've met poor people. Like it's weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I grew
Yeah.
up poor, but I was still like able to like I still have an education, right? Like it's just not as simple as, um, oh you guys didn't have foot to it, but it's like you kind of it moves in a way that's not as permanent or as like concrete
Mm-hmm.
as America used to be. I don't know about now.
Yeah.
So I've always found that very fascinating, right? And I've always found and fascinating also in the sort of context of privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this book I was writing in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
what during the um, George Floyd's protest, and which also after the George Floyd protest, I think there was the NSAS protest in Nigeria, where we had a lot of young people flooding the streets and sort of um, demanding that the government be accountable, right? That the government do better. So I was thinking, I was thinking very much about class systems, and I was also thinking about the privileges that I have, despite I think my own positionality on Nigeria's class systems. And we can see that in the book because there's another character who does not have as much privilege as Sami has, right?
Yeah.
And she then has to confront that. So I think this for me was more like thinking about it in terms of people, like people that I know, people that I've that I see in day-to-day life, people that I grew up with,
Mm-hmm.
and just thinking about the relationship they have with each other when it comes to class. But it was so important to me that Sami, despite her ideas of herself in terms of her class, confronts her own privilege.
Yeah. Something I'm really curious about regarding that is your characters, especially within the family, Somi and her brother, they're always talking about class,
Yeah.
and like self-improvement,
Yeah.
and social mobility,
Yeah.
like very head on.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's how the conversations that you experienced were? Because I feel like in the US, like some people are having those conversations, but a lot of time it's like can't talk about money. It's like impolite or whatever.
She was just shocking to me when
Yeah.
I was shocked by that when I first came to the US to just find that it was like a crass thing to do to talk about money. But yeah, that's not like Nigerians are very heads on with it. Like
Yeah.
if they have money, you're gonna know. You're
Yeah.
gonna see it in the shoes, in the wristwatch, and it's just something that like nobody's going to. It's just like it is, right? Like,
Right.
And again, I think a lot of it is also that Nigeria has a lot of poor people, and with that, there's a kind of solidarity. Like there's a like when you're poor in the US, people are like, oh, you must have done something wrong. Like you didn't work hard enough. Like pull yourself out by the bootstrap. When you're poor in Nigeria, it's like you have like people just. It's like somebody did it to you, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a much stronger consciousness of how this sort of political systems impoverish people.
Yeah.
So it's not the case that it's not talked about, and it's not the case that poor people are treated as though they've done something wrong, because like we can all see the system, right?
Yeah, totally. That's so interesting. And you capture all that complexity here in part because you have like you mentioned, so many characters, some that are like foils to each other. There's like the name characters who show up throughout the book, but there's also these like passing images and characters that I think clue us into to the fact that there's such a complicated class difference. Which brings me to a question about cast of characters.
Okay.
There's like a lot of characters in this book. Like I know novels tend to have a lot of characters, but like, and it works. They're pretty like organized and they serve a purpose, etc., etc. How'd you keep it straight? Because that's something I really struggle with. I think I was like looking back on my stories, and like there's a lot of stories with like 2 or 3 characters.
I don't know about struggle. I was just reading. I'm reading Ruben's novel, which is out in a week, and it has a lot of characters. And Ruben is doing just like this amazing thing with like pacing and like just we kind of can feel all of their yearnings. They all have stories, and it's just doing this short period of time, which is just like mind blowing. So I think you should take that back about it.
It's hard though. I don't know. I guess I'm asking hard. Because I've realized how hard it is to have so many, like a large cast. Like I think it's something that came up in a number of workshops when I was at Iowa, that some people would write stories with a lot of characters. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it was like, well, these 2 friends can be 1 friend.
That's true.
And I think it's project by project. So I'm kind of, is this just how it happened? Like you were like, this is my character, and these are all the people in her life, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just in trying to understand Sami, and sort of follow her in a way that was genuine and honest. Like, and there is this. I think it's weird when I read, novels, and it's like it's just one person in the novel.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not how people exist in the world. And I know fiction is not, reality, but like, that's not. It just doesn't. There's something about it that just feels untrue, right? Like people are because other people are, right? Which a lot of that is also, it undergirds my own philosophy about life, about writing. It's like when we're not alone, we can pretend that we are, but we're not. So when I read like stories about people with no friends, no family, like
no jobs,
that one gets me. I'm like, how do they eat, right? Like, does he like even if they're a nepo baby, like the money has to come from somewhere. So yeah, I think it's just in being honest about how she sort of moves around the world.
Totally.
This character's emerge.
Right, but I think you're totally also right that there is a type of like literary novel that is about the individual, and this is about the individual, obviously, because we have a main character. But it's about the system, and it's about her relationships and her web of support. And when that support fails, and the pressures that the support system puts on her, which is why, I mean, I say it's a great family novel, and it is, because I think I love that theme. But it's also about her social life in Iowa, her social life in Nigeria, like so many. It's about the whole web around her, and it does feel true. That's another compliment I forgot to give you, which is that these characters and this family felt really real to me. It was like, I feel like sometimes I read great novels and I'm like, sure, that's a family, but like I don't understand it. It just feels like maybe I don't relate to the family, or something about the family doesn't quite click. And this, immediately I was like,
I hope you don't relate to them, because it's a dysfunction.
I don't fully relate, but it felt very real. And I was like, this is how some siblings are.
Yeah.
And there's certain aspects of all the relationships that I think I was like, well, I can see the moments in which I've engaged with people in this way. And I think that's just the sign of a very like realistic and layered character. I guess I want to just ask you, before we open up for questions, about family novels. Do you have any that you love or that you were reading in preparation of this?
That is so good. honestly, I wasn't really exactly thinking about this as a family novel,
Hmm.
and I
None of them
wasn't.
me what I'm imposing on it.
Right, I
But I think
wasn't.
it
Yeah,
is that
no,
amongst
but no,
other
no, no.
things.
I think it's a family novel, but I was so I wasn't, particularly reading any family
Right.
novels, but I love Intermezzo, even though, that came out like long
Yeah.
before I, turned
Yeah,
18.
yeah,
But it's
yeah.
a family novel that I
I
really,
also, for the
really
record,
like.
loved it.
Yeah, it's a great one. Um, but I was, let me think, family novel. Hmm.
Or maybe more broadly novels that like,
Okay, broadly novels that I was,
yeah,
yeah,
that
I
maybe
was,
you think are in conversation, even if it's not specifically because of the family
yeah.
structure.
Anna Karenina. It's not in
Okay.
conversation, but I read a lot
Yeah.
of Anna Karenina when I was
Yeah.
writing this book. For some reason, Northgard, my struggle.
Interesting.
I was reading a lot of that while I was writing this novel. Um, I was also reading Americana, Adichie's
Hmm.
Americana. Um, I was also reading um, Tessa Hadley,
Okay.
The Past.
Uh-huh.
Um, So I think those are the books that you find like on my table, like
Right.
my desk rather, while I'm writing. Um, Achebe's Things Fall Apart is the big one for Arrow of God.
Hmm.
Things Fall Apart, Arrow of God, No Longer at Ease, the trilogy.
Hmm.
I had that close to me while I was
Specifically,
reading.
what, because the time period is so different. I'm curious what
Right.
you were like,
Pulling from,
or
yeah.
what, how, I mean, not that you were pulling, like how, yeah, what were those books giving you in the process?
Yeah, I think so. For Things Fall Apart, there is a depth of wisdom,
Yeah.
right, that I always sort of just try to like look at, to just tell myself, you too can do it, like, just there's some books that you just read that you don't then want to like sit on your desk and be stupid, right? Like, they just make you think harder,
Yeah.
be smarter. Achebe's books do that for me. And Anna Karenina, just the scenes. I think the scenes
Yeah.
are so well done. And scenes, I love to write scenes, and I'm always trying to think about how to make them more interesting and more alive. So I was really, reading Anna Karenina. My struggle is just a very vulnerable and honest, and has its issues, but just that honesty and vulnerability, it reminds me of that, just, and the
Yeah.
interiority, which I like to do. I like to write like long um 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 long sort of passages of interiority, and my struggle is a lot of that interiority, and I
Yeah.
think it's a beautiful book, the part one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah. They're also like sprawling. And this is honestly
sprawling.
pretty, not a massive book. It sounds like at some point it was even bigger.
Yes.
But it definitely has breadth.
Mm.
I think because of all the characters, because of the movement, a truly global story, right? There's a lot of movement. Um, and so maybe that like seeped in its own way.
Yeah.
And I also love that there's quite a few references to those books in here, I think,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very explicitly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. People have questions?
So good to see you.
I was curious about coming of age stories. It sounds maybe that was what
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
class. Are there some coming of age novels you're referencing,
Mm.
or what parts of the tradition of the coming of age novel were you like trying to work with here? What were you making new? What were you sticking to?
Yeah. I would say that this particular, for me, Sammy's coming of age was made more complicated by her being an immigrant, like leaving home, and I found that to be very. I mean, again, there's just a lot of my experiences that sort of seeps through here in that sort of section, in that sort of learning how to be in a new country. But I thought it was interesting. I remember thinking a lot about how that regression that I talked about.
Mhm.
Like, you come to, like, I came to the US when I was 23, but then it felt like I was being born anew in some ways, like trying to learn, a lot of things. So I found that to be just like a different kind of coming of age, exploration, like sort of um, um, having that clash with immigration. Um, and for books, coming of age books, like Normal People, Sally Rooney is,
Love.
yeah,
Also love.
yeah, I love it. It's something that I was, also thinking about. I forgot to mention that. While, and there's also trips there, like we see,
Right.
travel, right? Like just sort of experiencing new places as.
And also, we didn't even say there's like so much about love and relationships. That's
Yeah.
like a huge. I can't believe it hasn't come up till now. So now I'm seeing
Yeah.
the normal people. I
Yeah,
also
yeah.
for my novel was thinking a lot about normal people.
Yeah, it's such a
But also
intimate
coming
book
of age
and
novel.
coming of age
Yeah,
novel,
yeah.
right? So I would say, was I doing anything new? I don't think I wish I was doing something new. I'd like to, like, brag about myself in that way, but I just think I was just trying to follow like this young woman, and because I felt sorry for myself a lot in my 20s. Like I was just like, oh my God, Esther, like you're really struggling. So I could really relate to her in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. Just her oblivious, like she's just oblivious a lot of the time. She's just like confused. She's making so many mistakes. She wants to be good, but she doesn't know how to be good, and she's
Yeah.
also just failing at it. And I could relate to that
Yeah.
a lot.
And that's the
So,
stuff that makes coming of age novels so
right.
interesting.
Yeah, because it's just dumb people, right? Like when
Yeah.
you're 23, like you're dumb. So yeah.
Yeah, she makes some choices in here, especially regarding her relationships, her romantic relationships, which I loved reading about. Even when I was like, please, why are you doing this?
Right.
Why are you doing
You're
this?
like, do better.
Yeah.
Best book I've read for 2025.
Cindy!
I'm not even joking. This is the best book I've read for 2025.
Extremely good.
And I've been waiting for the last 3 months for people to experience this book. I want to talk everything you said. It's true. I still think about the main characters. Like, what is she doing? How is she doing? And it lives rent free.
Oh.
But I want to talk more about how passive she is. And generally, when I'm reading a book with a passive character, I get so mad. I'm like, can you wake up?
Yeah.
And when the guy read her for filth in bed, I was like, don't speak to her like that. But I want to talk about how you like balance that whole thing where as a character, I'm like, she's so passive, but also she's doing so much and you really just feel for her.
Yeah. I think, first of all, Cindy, thank you. I'm so happy you're here. Cindy has she had posted about this book at this early stage. Like, it means a lot. So thank you so much. Thank you. And yeah, like, again, I think it's like sort of her being passive, I think, allowed me to sort of enter into her interiority, much more. And I'm more in anything I write, I'm more concerned with the psyche of the character. And that's what I love to read in literature. Like I read literature to like find out about people, like human beings. So of course, like we can see that in what they do, but we also see that in what they don't do, right? And with Somi, we kind of understand, her in the things that she doesn't do. And I also think that earlier passivity allows her to change, as the book goes on. But I also think, so there's a big thing that happens in the sort of middle of the book, I'm not going to give it away, where we see her be so not passive.
Yeah.
Like she just, stands up and does this thing. And it's like, I think it hits hard, as the Gen Z say, it hits hard because like we see where she decides to show up, right?
Yeah.
And it's action, but it's still passive because it's not how she wants to show. Like, she can't show up like that for herself, right? But she should show up for somebody else. So I think, it's a character thing. I also think that it gives the book a character arc, like that, just surprises, right? She is she's consistently inconsistent. And when I talk to my students about that, like writing the passive character, again, I'm like, the juice has to be somewhere else. Like if the character isn't doing so much, like the juice has to be somewhere else. And I think the juice is in her interiority, and her her sort of confusion with figuring out this new place. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
My last thing is the title. Why? Yeah, it's such a beautiful title.
Thank you. I had the title before I started writing the book.
That is
Yeah.
amazing.
And it worked. It worked so well. But I got this title from a poem of a friend, Benga Deoba. He's an amazing poet. And I remember reading his title, this poem in like 2018, and just being like, just the line, the tiny things I have here. I was like, oh my God, 8 with that one. Please, can I take it? And he was like, yeah. And so I just kept it like, in the back of my head.
Amazing.
Yeah.
First of all, congrats.
Thank you.
I haven't read it. I'm hoping to get a copy. But when I decided to come here, one of the things I was thinking about was, I don't know if it's the disappearance of a pipeline. Back when I used to live in Lagos.
Oh, another Lego shell. Okay.
So back when we used to go to Ake and all those festivals, there was a pipeline. People who wanted to write, especially young people who wanted to write fiction.
Yeah.
Had a few places to go.
Yeah.
Including Adichie's.
Yeah. Yes, which I attended.
That's all now. So I often think about how that's hurting some of the things that they can do. Nigeria is a mess at the moment.
Yeah.
So people who
It's a mess. Yeah.
want to write are choosing to work in banks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chioma did it.
Yeah.
I mean, she literally worked in banks before she came here.
Yeah.
So lots of people are finding that MFAs are presenting through them some platforms to do it, but it's not every Nigerian who can do an MFA.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you think about it often about what that does to people who want to write. I don't write fiction. I write non-fiction.
Yeah.
But I often think about how that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And how that affects how much work we
Yeah.
can do.
Yeah.
Nigerians are incredibly talented people.
Yeah.
But if they don't have a platform where somebody can say to them, there's something here, which is what Frafina Trust is for.
Yeah.
Somebody saying to you, there's something here. So then you have confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel you. Yeah.
What do you think about how that's disappearing? And what do you think younger writers can do between having an idea for a book and getting their first one?
Honestly, I don't even think I'm qualified to sort of tell young writers how to sort of navigate this current terrible condition of Nigeria, because I left Nigeria in 2018. It was not the best country to be in, like in 2017, but it was pretty okay. Like again, I went to Adichie's Farafina Creative Writing Workshop. I had like community. I was like, I would go for my MFA and I'll come back home, right? Like there was just, and this was around the time when, again, a lot of people were coming back. I don't know if you remember, that period where it's like we had a lot of actors from the, who went to school in the UK and then came back to like start film, and it felt alive. There was, there was so much hope, and then I didn't know that we could regress any further. So I don't. What I'll tell like young Nigerian writers is just keep at it, because it's hard, but you just owe it to yourself to just keep at it. I was, my condition wasn't so great. Like when I applied to my my MFA, I was working I would leave my house at 6 a.m. to go to work, and I'll be back at 8 p.m. So it's because of plus traffic and everything, sometimes 9 p.m. And I would write after that. Terrible condition. So I'm not like, there's nothing about that is to be admired. I wish I couldn't. I wish I didn't have to do it. But I would say, like, if you can find a little bit of time. I used to read in buses, like like we have this weird yellow buses in Lagos, and I remember sitting in the bus and just have my phone touch in my head and not just like tie a scarf so that I can use it to like read because it's really dark. And I would do that, and I'll come back and I'll write. And yeah, so I'll just say, just keep at it. Like they can steal a lot from you, like, but your spirit is something that they can steal from you. So just, yeah.
Perfect.
I hope that answers your question.
And I think that's time. Yeah, well, thank you. Can we give another round of applause for Esther?
Thank you all so much.
So great.
Thank you Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. And thank you, Esther,
Thank
for
you so
celebrating this
much for
fantastic debut with us. So, some reminders before you wrap up. If you're still with us on the live stream, you can buy a copy by clicking the link in the live stream description. For those of you with us tonight, we have plenty of additional copies available at the register where you checked in. We also have a few remaining copies of the hardcover of Ruben's book. There's a Rio Grande in Heaven before the paperback comes out next week. So check those out at the front. And Esther will be around to sign and personalize your books. And that's going to be happening right where my coworker Geshem is pointing. So we're going to have you all line up along these shelves, get your book signed, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay cool as best you can, and pray for rain. So thank you all for joining us. Let's give these two
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming.